Welcome to Talk+Water, the podcast that takes a deep dive into the world of water with those making waves. My name is Todd Votteler, and I'm your host for Talk+Water. I'm also the principal of Collaborative Water Resolution, which you can find at waterdisputes.org. Finally, I'm editor-in-chief of Texas+Water and the Texas Water Journal. Both publications are free. Today, let's start out with a question. What if a winery could cut the amount of water needed to create a gallon of wine in half? Well, today's guest is doing just that. Steve Lohr is president and CEO of Lohr Vineyards and Wines. Steve is responsible for the overall management and strategic planning of Lohr Vineyards and Wines, with a particular focus on sales and finance. Lohr Vineyard and Wines produces 21.6 million bottles annually from a 35 wine portfolio. Their vineyards have a 50-year history of sustainable farming on 4,000 acres of estate vineyards in Paso Robles, Monterey County, and the Napa Valley. Steve, welcome and thank you for being part of Talk+Water.
Hey, Todd, it's great to be with you today.
It's been a long journey, hasn't it, to get to this point? Well, so let's start out with your background in water. What got you interested in water, Steve?
Oh, well, so one of my degrees is in civil engineering. The other one is in economics. But in civil engineering in particular, water is a big part of what you're studying. You know, whether it's something like the Bernoulli principle or what have you. You're looking at wastewater issues and, of course, soils issues and everything. But water in particular here is a huge subject in California. We have basically gone through a drought for the past decade, with the exception of 1 or 2 years where we got average amount of rain. But the other 8 years have all been below average. So, there's an old saying that Mark Twain put together, and that is, he said, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting over. And that's certainly the case here in California.
Maybe he said that. I'll tell you what he did say, which I love. He said, water taken in moderation never hurt anyone.
There you go.
Think about what does taken mean, right? It's fighting over water. So tell us about, obviously you mentioned the drought, the mega drought, and you can't open the newspaper or get on, the internet and look at a news site and not see something about the Colorado River and the impacts of the drought on the Colorado River. But the water you're using comes from different sources. Why don't you describe those?
That's right. So, yes, the Colorado River certainly comes through the very southern portion of California, but for many of us farmers here in California, we're using groundwater. And for where we are in Paso Robles, it's 100% groundwater. We do have a little bit of surface water that's coming from reservoirs in the area, but that's not directly used, at least at this point, for irrigation. It's used to help replenish the aquifers. And when we first started planting in 1986, we knew Paso Robles would be a great place to grow Bordeaux varieties, especially Cabernet and Merlot and such. It had great soil, great climate. At the time, again, this is 36 years ago, it appeared to have plenty of water because we were sitting on the largest aquifer on the west coast of the United States. But as other people came into the area and more straws were put in, that has become a situation where now there isn't enough water. So as a result, back in 2013, a moratorium was put over a good part of the Paso Robles appellation that does not allow for further water use. So whether that's planting a vineyard or growing carrots or even building a house, you're limited to what you've essentially used in the past.
Okay. So it's interesting to hear that, I've talked about Sigma on this podcast before, and I always get these acronyms wrong. It's Sustainable Groundwater Management Initiative, or is it something?
Yeah.
Or A is something like ACT, probably.
ACT, that's right.
And so I didn't realize that there are already places in California where you essentially have some form of regulation. You got a cap on use. It sounds like there. Is it a cap on use, or is it a cap on new users?
Yeah, good question, because there's a big difference between the two. It is a cap on new uses. So in other words, we're trying to keep water available for those who've had a historical use for it. If you say are buying land right now and there hasn't been historical use for the last 10 years, you essentially can't do anything with it. I mean, you could dry farm it, you could graze on it, but you wouldn't be able to plant something new on it.
Wow. And your aquifer there, I'm sure, you're also affected by the mega drought, as we discussed. Have you seen significant declines? I think many of my listeners are, familiar with, some pretty significant declines in parts of California from groundwater use, which has, resulted in some significant land subsidence. Have you had any of that kind of issue there with that aquifer?
Fortunately, we have not had issues, Todd, with subsidence. There are other parts of California that have definitely had issues there. And it all depends upon your soil profile. So, for instance, in the central part of California, where the soil structure is very granular, you take that water out and that soil profile essentially collapses. And there are some parts of the state where you see wells that are 30 feet above ground, amazingly, because the ground has subsided, that much over the last basically 50, 60 years. In our part of California, Paso Robles, which is halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles, and about 25 miles in from the Pacific Ocean, we have a very different type of soil structure, one that allows water to be taken out, but as the water's taken out, air can get in between the actual crystals, if you will, of soil, or particles of soil, and it maintains a structure. So the benefit of that is when we do get decent rains, the three major rivers that flow through our part of the Central Coast can help to replenish those depleted aquifers. However, it's not an immediate thing. It's not like you can go for 5 years of drought and get one great year of rain and everything's back to normal. No, it takes years for that water to get down to where the aquifer is, which, for many of us, you have your water table about 350 to 400 feet below the surface.
And that takes some energy to pump that water up. So, of course, everybody, I'm sure, in California now is thinking about water conservation in some way or another. But you've been doing this a long time. I mean, you started your efforts before this drought, it sounds like to me here. And so, tell me a little bit about that. What got you thinking about, I need to see if I can change the way I'm using water, or be more efficient with the water use for our vineyard. What got you on that track?
Yeah, so it was about 20 years ago where we started to see the water table declining. And we thought, well, this is interesting. We're not using any more water than normal. There were some municipal uses that were taking water out and, being used for normal residential and commercial purposes. And we just got to thinking, this is not just happening 1 or 2 or 3 years in a row. This is a general trend. So let's take a look at how we use water so that we have water not only for us, but for everybody else around us. And in winemaking in particular, obviously you're going to use water for grape growing, but in winemaking, once you're crushing those grapes, what can you do to use less water? And so, there's some low-hanging fruit, such as using high-pressure, low-flow water nozzles in your cleaning activities. If you spill some wine, in the 90s, we used to just take a hose and wash it down the drain. But we started squeegeeing it instead of hosing it down. When it comes to cleaning out a barrel, and we're very traditional in our winemaking methods, we use small 59-gallon oak barrels coming from France and Hungary and America here. How long does it really take? And how much water do you need to truly clean out a barrel? So it's actually less than what you'd think. And through other behavior modification, whereby, we would have a target for how much water we would use each day in the winery. And Jeff, who is in charge of our environmental applications down in Paso Robles, would do simple little things like, put a little happy face on that whiteboard if we stayed under our water use goal that day. And it's amazing how just little things like that really make a difference, and people start not only hearing mandates from above, but also thinking on their own, hey, what can I do to use less water? And so back in 2003, when we first started really tracking how much water we would use in the winery, common industry average was to use about 6 to 7 gallons of water to make 1 gallon of wine. And even in 2003, we were only using about 3.5 gallons of water to make 1 gallon of wine. Part of that was just efficiencies of scale. We have some larger tanks, but on the other hand, we use barrels a lot more than most people do. So we had some intensive water uses, but through all these other foci, looking at ways to use less water, within about 5 to 6 years, we were able to reduce that 3.5 gallons of water to make a gallon of wine down to somewhere between 1.3 and 1.6 gallons of water to make 1 gallon of wine. So,
oh my gosh,
almost as good as Jesus, but not quite.
Yeah. Well, you use what, 20% or so, 15%, something like that, of what other people are using to produce 1 gallon of wine. It sounds like that when I do those numbers.
Yeah, exactly, especially compared to what it was 20 years ago. As a whole, the industry continues to move forward. So I would say, the average use in the industry might still be in that 4 to 5 gallons of water to make a gallon of wine. But yeah, depending upon the vintage, if we're having a smaller vintage, then we're going to use more water, because you still have to use the same amount of water at the end of the day to clean everything. If we have a larger vintage, then we can be more efficient with water. We'll get closer to that 1.3 gallons of water to make a gallon of wine.
So when you started doing this, were you kind of the early adopter, I guess is the best phrase, for in your region, or were your neighbors all doing the same thing? Have they now, seen what you've done, and they're, people are like trying to replicate the success you've had at reducing your water use? Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been leaders in sustainability in general, of which water is one part. And we've been doing things both in the winery and in the vineyards to use less water. And we are very happy to share that with our fellow growers and vintners. After all, it not only helps us, but it helps out the community as a whole, which is one of the tenets of sustainability, that you just don't put your own self-interest first. You think about the greater good of the area. So we've shared a lot of our processes with other folks, not only in Paso Robles, but in other parts of California. We also have a really good series of organizations which also look at sustainability, of which water, again, is a huge part. I've been on the board of the California Sustainable Winegrowing Alliance for the last 12 years and was chairman of it a couple times as well. And if any of us kind of come up with a better practice, we're really good about sharing it with others. There are some industries where you absolutely don't share secrets, among your competitors.
Oh, yeah.
But,
I know about, yeah, they're having a heyday right now in Texas, yeah.
Right. But in our industry, grape growing and winemaking is really half art and half science, and both are best when they're shared.
So I'm going to come back and ask you a little bit more about your sustainability efforts here in a minute, but I want to go back talking about what you're doing to, use less water. And I'm going to demonstrate my mastery of the lingo. You are monitoring evapotranspiration at the blade level. Mm-hmm. You got to tell everybody what a blade is, but I thought I employed that word correctly.
There you go. Sounds like you're part of the industry there, Todd. Yeah. So for your listeners, a blade refers to a grapevine leaf. And, there are a number of ways to look at how much water you can use in the vineyard. Traditionally, many of us have used soil moisture meters. I would say that's still the most common thing to do in the industry, is have these probes. They'll typically go down 1 to 3 feet, and you can measure how much moisture there is in the soil. Well, that's really great for telling you how much moisture is available, but it doesn't tell you how much moisture the vine actually needs. And so what we do is use pressure bombs, which doesn't mean anything explosive.
Pressure bombs, okay.
Pressure bombs, yeah. So what we're doing there is we'll put essentially like a plastic bag over a leaf in the morning, a grapevine leaf in the morning, over many leaves, because, like any good science, you need to replicate this many times. And then leave it on there for a few hours until solar noon, which is generally sometime during the noon hour. During that period of time in the morning, the amount of water that's being used by the grapevine is stabilized. And what we can do is take off the grape leaf and its stem. What we'll do is we'll put that grapevine leaf, or now it's called a blade, into a pressurized steel cylinder container, and we'll have that grapevine stem just poking out of the top, and then we'll pressurize it. And at the point where we just start to see a little bit of water coming out of that stem, we will stop the pressurization, and we'll take a look at how many atmospheres of pressure or how many bars of pressure it was taking to get that first little glimpse of fluid. And if it doesn't take that much pressure, like 8 or 9 atmospheres, then we know the wine has, or the grapevine has, plenty of water in its system. We don't need to water it, despite what a soil moisture meter might have to say. If it takes a lot, like 12, 13, 14 atmospheres of pressure, then we know the vine is under some stress and we need to get water to it, and soon. So it's a little more labor intensive for sure, because we'll hire some interns from our local Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo University here, and it's good for them in that they get firsthand experience out in the vineyards. It's good for us in that we can also determine, hey, who's the sharp one or the sharpest ones among this new crop of interns, and we may offer them a job at the end of harvest. But the key thing is that we're not putting on any more water than the grapevine actually needs.
That's great. That's great. Well, I mean, it's obvious how you brought your background into engineering, into working and solving this problem. So the water you're saving, do you use that to increase the number of grapevines that you grow? Do you lease that or sell that, or what do you do with the water that you have saved?
Mm-hmm. Well, so that depends upon where you are in California. There are some areas of California where you can sell water, and that has its own political mess that goes on. That doesn't happen in Paso Robles or where we are in Monterey or where we are in Napa Valley. Of those three areas, Paso Robles has the most serious situation. So the water that is saved is merely going to keep the water table at a higher level than it might otherwise be.
That's great. That's great. I ask because I'm doing a project right now for an organization here in Texas called Texas 2036, where I'm looking at water markets. And, I'm looking at what's going on in California as well as a whole bunch of other places. And so there was a free, kind of like additional bit of research for me.
There you go. Anytime, Todd.
Well, before we talk about your the work that you're doing with sustainability, so you also have a habitat project, a riverbank restoration project that you're part of. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's up in our vineyard in St. Helena in the middle part of the Napa Valley, where there are rivers that flow. And I say that jokingly because where we are in Paso Robles, three major rivers, two of them in a good year, rainfall will only flow for 4 or 5 days because the majority of the water flows below ground. But up in Napa Valley, where there's roughly twice the amount of rainfall, or even 3 times as much, in Paso, we're getting about 12 to 14 inches of rainfall per year. Up in Napa Valley, we're getting anywhere from 30 to 35 inches of rainfall per year. So our St. Helena vineyard, also known as Carol's Vineyard, named after my mom, is right up against the Napa River. And believe it or not, there are still some steelhead and other salmonids that make their that go up the river to spawn. And so those rivers are very protected. And what would happen, especially about 7 or 8 years ago, is when we did get some decent rains, the water would tend to gouge out the side of our bank. And we're not allowed to really put concrete there because all that does is it focuses the water energy and makes it worse for the farmer or grower right next, downriver from you. So what we did was we restored the bank by planting these willow bushes and also putting in big, heavy rock that weighs 1,000 to 2,000 pounds each, with a lot of smaller rock. And then there's a mesh that goes in there to help the willow bushes, which will become trees, to get started. And what that really does is several things. One, it protects your property from eroding, but also those willows, which love water, the current hits those willow bushes, and quite frankly, it slows down the current. So it's not only creating less gouging of the bank for your particular property, but it's also helping the growers downstream by slowing the current for them.
Well, just, thinking about those efforts, I've seen a lot of examples of what not to do to try to reduce, erosion along riverbanks. And there's a place up on the Flathead River, lower part of the Flathead River, that I spend a lot of time on every year, where you can see that sometime in the past, the landowner went to junkyard and bought dozens of Model A's and Model T's and put them in the bin there. And, all that's eroding and kind of about to fall off down into the river. And so, I like your way better. But to kind of, wrap that up. So start to talk about more kind of sustainability issues. You are also using solar power at your vineyard. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so solar power, obviously very key here in California, key in Texas as well with yes. all of the sun that you guys get.
I might be in that game here pretty soon myself. We'll see.
There you go. Yeah. Well, so solar for me and for J. Lohr, back when I was in college, and I'll date myself here, I was in college in the 80s, and I had a...
that's not on this show. That's not dating yourself.
Yep. But I had this great civil engineering professor at Stanford. His name was Gil Masters. And Gil wrote a book called Other Homes and Garbage. And, part of it was recycling. Part of it was passive solar home design, what you can do to design your home on your site such that you really use the sun to not so much warm up your house during the day as to keep it cooler, but still warming it up enough where you can stay warm at night, because here in California, it cools down quite a bit at nighttime. And of course, there were photovoltaics, which we think of as solar cells. Back in the 80s, that was kind of an interesting idea, but it didn't make any economic sense. Right. Like many technologies, you've got to work on it for a number of years or in some cases decades for it to right. really make sense. So, I kind of took that all in and thought, okay, sometime in the future. And we had a meeting for fellow vintners and growers with Pacific Gas and Electric, or PG&E is the acronym. That's our local utility here for the central part in Northern California. And interestingly enough, they get paid not by how much production they can create or capacity in the system to create more electricity. They are incentivized by the state to actually have others produce electricity, i.e. on-site. And of course, they're still getting paid by ratepayers, but they are incentivized to help solar go in. So we were holding this forum for local vintners and growers at our winery in Paso Robles back in 2007. And I just got to thinking, we have 320 days of sunshine per year. During July and August, it easily gets to 95 to 100 degrees. If you've been around wineries, cold is very important. You want to keep your fermentation tanks cool. You want to keep your bell rooms cold, typically around 55 to 57 degrees. That uses a lot of energy. So just got to thinking, well, let's jump into this. And so one decision was, do we go with a traditional fixed array, array being a whole group of solar panels facing south? That's what most people do, and that's good. Or do we do a solar tracking array? And a solar tracking array is one where the panels are pointed east in the morning, and as the sun tracks through the sky during the day, the panels are constantly tracking the sun. And as a result, you can be 15% more efficient with your energy collection from the sun. Obviously, it's more expensive because now you have to have a ground-mounted system rather than something you can put up on a roof, because you have to withstand wind loads with this array that's constantly moving and such. But in the end, that 15% made a big difference. So we put in what was at the time and what still is the largest solar tracking array of any winery in North America.
Wow.
And it powers about 75% of all of our electrical needs as for our Paso Robles winery, as well as our tasting room.
So how do you have that situated on your property? Is it like next to the grapevines, or how's it kind of integrate into the property?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it is right near our winery. For something like that, closer is better. And unfortunately, it meant taking out some vineyards. We had some really nice Merlot that was growing there 15 years ago. And as an economist as well, you look at that opportunity cost between what you're going to get from the vineyard, both in quality and revenue, versus what you're doing right for the community by creating less greenhouse gas emissions and also saving yourself money through not having to pay as much to the local utilities. And in the end, it was an easy choice. We are producing enough power from that one solar tracking array to power 300 homes.
Wow.
And another way to look at it is in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. We are saving CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions from going into the air, the equivalent of not driving a vehicle 97 million miles over the roughly 25-year expected lifespan of the solar cells.
Wow. 97 million. That's like, that's a lot of driving even for me.
There you go. I know you've got big open expanse there in Texas, but
right.
97 million miles is a lot no matter where you are.
Well, my recall of facts is not as good as it used to be, but I was trying to remember how many miles one astronomical unit is, the distance between the sun and Earth. And I can't remember. I think maybe it's 23 million, but I'm not sure. And so just trying to put in perspective what that distance is. Mm-hmm. I know that you put this array in, it sounds like, 15 years ago or something like that. And the technology is cheaper now, a lot cheaper. I'm just curious, have you paid off that, or did it pay off itself within a certain amount of time, or how's that work?
Yeah. So, thanks to incentives from both the federal and state governments and then PG&E, at the time there was a 30% federal tax credit for putting in systems like these. There was a small credit from the state of California. PG&E also had their incentives. So the idea going into it was that this was supposed to pay for itself within 7 years. It came online of Thanksgiving 2008, and almost to the month, sure enough, 7 years later, wow, it had paid for itself. And so essentially with, 25 plus or minus expected life of these solar panels, we're getting 20 years of free electricity, which is great to anybody's bottom line.
Gosh, yes. So, going back to the California Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance, you have been certified sustainable for since 2010. Is that right? And
that's right.
You also won some awards for your sustainable winemaking. Can you tell us a little bit about the program that the California Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance has, and also about your other awards that you won apart from that?
Sure, sure. So the California Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance is an organization which spreads best business practices to grape growers and winemakers statewide. And it starts off with a handbook, which of course, years ago was several hundred pages. It's now gone digital. It's still several hundred pages digitally, but it is arguably the world's most defined way of looking at what we call the 3 E's. So, sustainability is kind of a hard thing to describe. Organic is so easy, right? Just don't use any synthetic pesticides or fungicides or what have you. And when I buy fruits and vegetables, I'm always looking to buy organic. But how do you define sustainable? That's much tougher, and it's something even for those of us in the industry have had a kind of hard time really defining it over the years. We've essentially boiled it down to what we call the 3 E's. One of them is environment. How do you take care of your soil, your water, your air? It's the stuff we most often think about when we think about sustainability, environment. Well, there are 2 other E's. Another E is social equity. And social equity is, how do you treat your employees? How do you treat, your neighbors, your community, whether that community is local to your city or nationwide or global? What things are you doing with your human capital to not only make your business better, but make your folks better? And then the 3rd E is one most people just don't think about, and that is economics. That gets lost in the conversation most often, but it's so important because if you can't make a buck at what you're doing, you're not going to be around for too long.
Right.
And by definition, that's not sustainable.
Right.
So
right.
Looking at those 3 E's, from there are about 250 different criteria across 15 different chapters at CSWA. And again, there's a chapter on air, another one on water, another one on energy efficiency, another one on community and such. And at the very most basic level, you can do a self-assessment looking at these criteria, and it will spell it out for you. Whether is this criteria 1, which would be a standard business practice, or is it up to a number 4 for that given criteria, which means you are a model of sustainability and everybody else should be looking at what you're doing. And of course, there are levels 2 and 3 in between. So back in 2010, after having this workbook for about 8 years, goes back to 2002 is when the CSWA started this, they started asking around for those who might want to be part of a pilot program to be certified sustainable. Because, we've all heard about greenwashing. People or industries or individual companies saying, hey, we're sustainable, and you peel back the layers. Yeah, not really, or not much at all. That's greenwashing. And so certification is what takes that doubt out. And that's where a third-party auditor comes in and makes sure you're walking the walk. And so we were one of the first 17 vineyards and wineries in the state of California to become certified sustainable through the CSWA back in 2010. And over the years, we've continued to refine our methods, both statewide through the CSWA, as well as through other organizations like Vineyard Team, which is another Central Coast organization, which is fantastic at looking at primarily the growing side of sustainability. There are other organizations like Lodi Rules up in Lodi, which is east of San Francisco. And we actually have our workbook based on part of what they were doing at also that roughly same time. There are groups like Napa Green up in the Napa Valley, fish-friendly farming, which is very much of a North Coast, a Napa and Sonoma County thing because they actually have fish in their streams up there. We don't because we don't have the streams. And Oregon has Oregon Live. There are other sustainability organizations in New York State, what have you. But we've continued to refine our methods, both through these organizations and just at J. Lohr in particular. And each year, there are 4 what are known as Green Medal Awards given. One of them is the Green Medal for environmental practices. What are you doing to use less water? Or what are you doing to keep your air cleaner? And one vineyard or winery in California year will get that. Then there's another one for community. What are you doing to show that, you're really appreciating your employees or helping out your community again? And that can be local or national. There's another one for efficiency. What kind of business things are you doing to become more efficient? But the ultimate award is the Green Medal Leader Award. It's given to one vineyard or one winery per year that does the best at handling all 3 of those concepts. And in 2020, we got that Green Medal Leader Award. And I'm very proud of our team for...
Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you, Todd. Very, very proud of our team for everything that, they've done there. I started our sustainability team back in 2008 here at J. Lohr, and we've got a great group of folks who really focus on it on just a daily basis.
So we're going to kind of start wrapping up a little bit here, but I do want to ask you this. What do you think the wine industry in California is thinking about climate change and how you are going to prepare for it and what that might mean? I'm just kind of interested in how your industry is looking at what kind of challenges are going to be facing it here, and what their thinking is about what they might do to modify how they operate, anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a key question, and something, we're always looking at, because climate change is real. We're seeing it. We've long had, daytime temperature highs of 90, 95, even 100 degrees during the daytime. The good thing is that, especially in Paso Robles or the middle part of the Napa Valley, we'll drop 40 to 50 degrees in temperature between the daytime high and the nighttime low. So yes, it may be the mid 90s during the day, but in July and August, it'll drop down to the low 50s or even high 40s at night, which really helps with, buffering the climate change. But nevertheless, when it's 95 or 100 degrees, that's a lot for anybody to take, whether you're a human or a grapevine. Yeah. So there are certain things we do to adapt. One thing is we use shade cloth, which is, kind of think like, the net on your ping pong table. You've got that nice little net going on there. That's probably, going to allow 80 to 90% of your light to go through. Well, imagine something that's not just 4 or 5 inches high, but maybe 18 inches or 24 inches high. You can put that over the fruit zone on your vines, and then you can dial in, do you want 60% of the light to go through, 50%, 40%? Wow. You obviously want enough so that the vines are still photosynthesizing and getting the grapes ripe, but you don't want so much sunlight that the grapes are getting, dehydrated and raisined. That's not going to do anybody any good other than sun-made raisins. But boy, if you're growing raisins...
California raisins, yes. That is a big deal.
Yeah, if you're growing Thompson Seedless, you want raisins. But if you're growing wine grapes, no, that's way too expensive a process. So there are other things we've done over the years too. So when we started planting grapes, we started in Monterey in the 70s, but in Paso Robles in the 80s. And at that time, everybody pretty much planted east-west. And that is, the vine row would be east-west.
Okay, oriented east-west.
Yeah. East, that's right. And then we had this great viticulturist who was kind of like a flying viticulturist. He would go around different parts of the world, and he came up with the idea of that instead of, going east-west, go north-south. The idea being that you'll get the morning sun on the east side and the afternoon sun on the west side. You won't get so much of it all day long on the south side. And that makes sense. But in our area, Paso Robles or many other warmer parts of California, that does not work so well because we just get scorched on that western side. The afternoon facing fruit just gets scorched. And, as you think about it, it makes perfect sense because this lovely guy, he came up with this idea, and he lives on the island of Tasmania, southern Australia. So that's cool climate wine growing. And of course, it's going to work there. It doesn't work in warmer, hot climate. So we also started then changing the orientation of our rows to go northeast, southwest. So you get more hours of the cooler morning sun and few hours of the warmer afternoon sun, kind of more of a glancing type of exposure of the sun's rays. So those are some things we're doing. There's also a lot you can do with canopy management, how you use the vines to essentially shade their own clusters. That's very important. But, another thing, Todd, that may be just a brutal reality is that unless we collectively here in America and around the world can work on climate change, 50 years from now, we may not be able to grow high-quality Cabernet, whether it's Paso Robles or Napa Valley. It'll just be too warm. And you'll no longer know Napa for Cabernet Sauvignon. You may know it for something like Nero d'Avola, which is a grape that does very well in Sicily, where it's just hot, hot, hot.
Gosh, there's so much science to what you're doing, as well as engineering, that I think most people don't really, have a hint of that when they're opening a bottle of wine about all that's gone into it. And so, this has really been informative for me. And, I'm very interested in how, people like you are innovating to use less water in agriculture. And, it sounds like you really, accomplished a great deal, and that it's been a good example to other people in your industry. And I'd love to see, someday that number of gallons, needed to make of water to make a gallon of wine is approaching a gallon or 2 gallons like you are. To get everybody else to get down there.
Yeah. Thanks so much. It would that's certainly the goal in the winery. Of course, it takes more than that in the vineyards, but we're doing many things to also use less water in the vineyards too.
So, Steve, it's time for our final question. How can listeners find out more about J. Lohr Vineyard and Wines? And, you might also just tell us a little bit more about what you offer there when you get visitors, what, the things they can do.
Yeah. In terms of the experience they may have when they visit us?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, first of all, since most of your listeners are probably going to be remote, just get onto our website. Very simple, www.jlohr.com, jlohr.com. And there you'll not only be able to see pictures of our various vineyards. Obviously, you'll be able to take a look at those 35 plus different wines we're making. We also have a page several pages on sustainability. So if sustainability is your interest, and I imagine it probably is if you're listening to this podcast, you'll be able to see other things that we're doing in sustainability. And then if you're fortunate to be able to make it out to California, whether that's the Central Coast, we have our tasting room at our Red Winery in Paso Robles. just a lovely part of California, and there are over 270 wineries just in Paso now. It's arguably the most dynamic wine growing region in California, and I say arguably because there are lots of other great wine growing regions, but there's a lot to see. But yeah, come out and see us. We'll take really good care of you. Our winery's right in the midst of our vineyards there. We've got a beautiful new remodeled tasting room, and we're very much educators. We love to talk about wine and grape growing. Or let's say that you don't have time to go to the Central Coast, because it is 4 hours north of Los Angeles and 3.5 hours south of San Francisco. You can come to our original winery right here in downtown San Jose, where just an hour south of San Francisco, or about 5 minutes from the San Jose airport, and we'll receive you here, and you'll get the same great experience. It's just not out in the midst of the vineyards. It's in the middle of Silicon Valley, but you'll get great access to wines, not only that you'll see maybe on your shelves in stores or in restaurants, but there are a lot of wines we make that don't make it to retail and restaurant, that are just wine club only or online only. So many different ways, but we'll take good care of you, whether it's online or in person.
That's great. That's great. Well, I have personally tried some of your wines, for medicinal purposes only. And I was feeling a lot better.
Oh, good.
So they did the trick. I've really enjoyed this, Steve. And I know we had, some trials and tribulations getting it to come together, but I'm glad that you stuck with it. And I want to thank you for joining us today.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Todd. It was great to spend this time with you. And, thank you for the interest in kind of what we're doing here in California. And for you and our listeners, feel free to reach out at any time. I'll always be happy to help out with anything water or sustainability related.
Great. Thank you. This has been Talk+Water, and my guest today was Steve Lohr, President and CEO of Lohr Vineyards, which is based in San Jose, California. I want to thank you, our listeners, for tuning in today. I also want to give a big thank you to Anna Huff at the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment at Texas State University for getting each episode of Talk+Water ready to roll. My name is Todd Votteler. Let's talk water again soon.